Good morning, everybody. It is 9:31. This is the Council Subcommittee on Water Issues meeting on May 4th, Tuesday, and it is 9:31. And today we're going to talk about several items. So if we could take roll call first, please.
Chairman Blair.
Here.
Member Good.
Here.
Member Sichka.
Here.
Okay, everybody's here and accounted for. And we will read the disclaimer of public comment. Public comment will be accepted following each agenda item and are limited to 3 minutes. Please complete a comment card that's at the back of the room there and return it to the city clerk. Speakers will be called in the order which they are received. So the first item on today's agenda is approval of April 6th, 2021 meeting minutes.
So moved.
Bill, you okay with them? You have any corrections?
Well, only the fact that under discussion, Part A, there was a reference to my seconding the motion and being listed as Chairman Good. So
Cool. I'm okay with that.
I was promoted, but I just
They promoted you.
Thank you.
That's good.
So that should be member.
All right. So we'll make those corrections. And do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving right along. Item B is infrastructure. It's a standing topic that we like to talk about to keep people informed. It's on infrastructure, pumping versus recharge, 2021 update. Hi, Gwen.
Good morning. Good morning, members of the committee. Gwen Rowich with Public Works. I'll just give you a brief overview of this month's pumping versus recharge deliveries. Although the graph in front of you is year to date, it begins in January of 2021 and runs through March data. So in 2021, water pumped was 466.7 acre feet as compared to water pumped in 2020 of 417.48 acre feet. Effluent deliveries in 2021 was 305.31 acre feet as compared to effluent deliveries in 2020 of 572.8 acre feet. Although Mr. Palladini has pointed out that this number may be in error, so we'll check our numbers and bring it back to a correction to you next month if that number is in fact in error.
Are you talking about the effluent delivery number in 2020?
I am, because it's higher than,
It exceeds the amount pumped by 100.
I know.
it exceeds the amount pumped,
Jumped
so.
out to me. It was substantial.
Oh, okay, so we'll let Craig.
That is possible in 2010. That's where we had a very wet winter and 2020 with extreme wet weather conditions that increases I&I. So we have the potential to receive and treat more than what we sell.
Nonetheless, we'll double check that number for next month's report. So surface water deliveries in 2021 have not occurred yet. Typically, we don't start recharging surface water until April 1st, although this year we have not begun any surface water recharge. Surface water deliveries in 2020 were more favorable because of a wet winter and the Verde chain being full. So last year we were able to start recharging surface water in March. So we recharged 199.94 acre feet. To date, in 2021, we've pumped 1,320 acre feet and delivered 930 acre feet to the recharge facility. Overall, for the month of March, we recharged approximately 65% of pumping, and the average so far year to date is 71%. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Questions, folks?
I don't know. Do you have any significant analysis of trends? Are we going up, down, same, other than that comment about the very wet winter we had last year?
We have seen some increase in pumping over last year, but it's early in the first quarter. We are headed into summer months, and the prediction is for continued drought in the region. So we would expect to see the same or maybe a little higher pumping for summer of 2021.
Yeah, I recall the chart that was presented at our last meeting showed a very significant increase in pumping.
It's about 15 acre feet per day. Isn't that right? I was looking at the difference in what was pumped in 2021 in February opposed to, January and again in March, and that just has to do with the number of days in the month. So it runs pretty consistent at 14.915 per day.
Yeah, Gwen, I have a question, and maybe Craig can answer this. I know that you were saying that Craig, I know you were saying that the meters on some of these new developments were broken, and you didn't get a good estimate of how much they were sending back to the recharge facility. Have those meters been fixed, and are you getting a good idea of what percentage is coming back to us from the new developments?
So thank you, Member Shiska. The meters you're identifying and discussion talking about is we have meters on the Prop 400 subdivisions and or annexation areas. So in those, we have a meter on the wastewater collection system that is supposed to meter all of the return wastewater flow from that subdivision.
Right.
And yes, during 2020, there was a malfunction in the calibration of the meter or two of them. Definitely in, for instance, Granite Dells Estates. That meter was not calibrated correctly, was not metering correctly. When we started comparing it to water sold in the area, it was representing more returned than what was sold in that area, but we did not have, that wet weather situation going throughout the year. And yes, they have been worked on. We are being told by the manufacturer, the representative, the people that worked on them, that they are accurate now. And we are watching them. It's only been a couple months since that was worked. We're watching them to see if it appears that they are accurate and working correctly.
Okay, so assuming that they are accurate on the second time around, what is the percentage of return? I noticed that this is probably a percentage of return for all of Prescott is average of 71%. What I'm wondering is, are you experiencing a higher average of return from what is metered in, say, Granite Dells Estates now?
If I gave you a absolute specific answer today, I'd be speaking out of turn because I haven't seen those numbers in order to compare that and say, yes, it is different. And you are correct. This average here is total water.
Right.
So this average is inflated downward because we have over 3,000, as one of our topics today, we have over 3,000 water users that do not send back anything. So then that draws this total average down.
So Mr. Chair, I'd like to request that we do get some kind of a percentage of recharge or sending back as soon as possible. I'd really like to know what the new developments are actually sending back to us.
May meeting?
Pardon me?
May meeting?
That would be perfect.
Yeah.
June. Okay.
Well, this is, yeah.
Well, yeah. Are you
That too.
Are you reading?
We may
Are
have
you or
that in
can you be
June.
reading those month to month?
Yes, we can. I cannot answer if we are reading them month to month. We should be, though, because we need to be tracking and keeping, tabs on whether the calculation or the calibration, seems correct.
Well, it's important to know what the responsibility of this community is towards being able to capture as much recharge as we can. So we need to know what that number is because there's going to be more of that coming down the line. And I think we need to show people that it's important to capture opposed to what's pumping.
And we are getting the accurate recharge at the recharge facility, but we also have to be accurate in regards to the Prop 400 requirements on those subdivisions. Right. So we have to be able to report that correctly.
But it also reflects, at least as far as I'm concerned, when you look at these numbers of pumping percentage and you look at how they go up and down, the return, and we may not be returning as much in March because it got warmer and we had outdoor watering goes up. which absolutely reflects this number because we're not sending it back.
What will also make monthly changes to those percentages is the matter of when it comes to the water billing, that's not a hard set date every single month.
Right.
So then our water billing, it runs anywhere from 28 to 32 days on the cycle.
Yeah.
And where everything that we're doing on reading the meters for recharge and such is hard set on the month exactly.
Well, Craig, the reason I want to know is because people talk about new development as being detrimental as much as what we're showing here, only 71% coming back. It's my belief that in new developments, with all of the water efficient things inside of the house and with very little to water outside of the house, that they're returning far more than what the average for the city is. And I'd like to know that.
Okay. And I believe that to be accurate as well. We will bring back meter readings and confirmation on calibration to provide that accurate information.
Thank you.
Yeah, I second that. I think that should be a standard part of our monthly reports.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, is that all on item B, Gwen?
Yes, Chairman, it is.
Okay, we're going to go to item C, which is going to be review the discussion of draft City of Prescott Water and Sewer Connection Policy. We do have a presentation, so the way this will work is we'll watch the whole presentation in its total. Then I'll ask committee members for their comments, and then we'll go to the public for their comments. That work for you guys? Okay. And by the way, thank you for the rest of the staff being here. I know you're getting paid anyway, but it's always nice to see those smiling faces out there, including you, George.
We need as many smiling faces as we can get.
I think we're going to have to share a different screen now for our presentation.
I made it the thing. You should be good. Yeah, you should be good.
Jennifer, what do you see?
I see that.
See that?
Yes.
I broke the ball.
Just as long as you don't try to put that on your nose.
Okay. Good morning, Chairman, members. Yes, this is the first presentation to you as a full group in regards to Water and Sewer Connections Commission. So this is first presentation to you. Our anticipation is that today we go through the presentation, we have discussion, questions. At the end, we open it up for public comments and questions as well, and also anticipate that we will bring this back again. Today, you all are not going to be able to absorb every bit of this instantly, so you're going to need time to go through it, come up with more questions and comments, and we come back and we talk about it again. This is draft. This is proposed. This is considerations. This is nothing that is been approved, accepted, set in stone by any means. So the committee was formed in June of 21. No, it'd be June of 20.
20.
To create a water and sewer connection policy. So the chairman and representative from council was Councilman Steve Blair. Commission members were Jane Orr, Jim Hazelbaker, Mark Natubsky, Michael Breen, Millie Owens, Sandy Griffiths, and Sherry Hanna. So to begin the commission off, we created a mission and goals statement. So the mission was to complete a comprehensive policy and implementation of a sewer service expansion program. The goals of the commission We're, as we have outlined here, to identify the what and why with several areas as far as watershed, recharge, and improving services. Then to create the policy. That policy would be framework then to organize the program. To create guidelines for the stewards of the program now and into the future. Because this consideration of expanding the sewer system is not something that's going to happen fast. We estimate that it very easily can be 25 to a 30-year program to establish it for the size and magnitude that of creating that sewer system would be. Then it was to review and identify funding management, sources, and consideration for who pays for what. The mechanisms for that, whether grants, loans, financing, then methods, whether districts or assessments, and then to also review the unsewered areas, evaluate feasibility of the sewer system expansion, and then expansion of project priorities and timing. So one of those items that's directly related to the reason behind consideration of the program is environmental impacts. So we have the Upper Granite Creek Watershed Pollution Reduction Plan that was completed in November of 2020. Within that, it included TMDL, total maximum daily loading, of pollutants within the Granite Creek watershed and Watson Lake. So it also identified known point source pollutants, including E. coli, which was directly by means of DNA, included human E. coli. So on this representation, the blue dots are all of the water connections that are on sewer. The yellow dots are water connections, water customers that are on septic systems. On this map, then it adds in the impaired water bodies and waterways are in red. Watson Lake is impaired for nitrogen and phosphorus. Granite Creek is impaired for phosphorus, E. coli, dissolved solids, oxygen, and suspended solids. Willow Lake is orange on this map. It has been identified as impaired for ammonia, and which is directly linked to septics. And then Willow Creek is currently being studied. It's the light blue. So ADQ is working on Willow Creek. It just has not put the exact label on it yet as far as impaired. So I mentioned here are the identification, the point source pollutants associated with the Upper Granite Creek watershed. And that came right from the reduction plan. That reduction plan then in turn identified mitigation strategies. And two specifically related to this topic, it identified and recommended to connect septic systems to municipal sewer when possible, and adopt an ordinance requiring connection to the sewer system when available for new development. It also identified reducing pollutants as an important environmental issue, improves the health of the creeks, lakes, and aquifers, extends the life of city investments in clean water. So if we go and put money into projects to improve Watson Lake water quality, we are just treating the symptom. We're not taking care of the cause. It helps meet ADQ and Clean Water Act obligations, and it improves the quality of life for residents and visitors to our creeks and lakes. And moving into recharge. So, can we get, well, I won't mess it up trying to get rid of that bar. Recharge and recovery. So on the left, figure A, there's natural recharge that happens within the creek, the waterways. There's rainfall on the land itself that percolates in, ultimately recharging the aquifer. On the right side, then you get into managed recharge. We have recharge basins that we release the treated effluent as well as surface water into our basins, then directly creating that benefit then to recharge that to the aquifer. And then there can be recovery wells, extraction wells within the vicinity then in order to recover that water that has been recharged. So this is a picture of our groundwater recharge facility out there. So the city operates this facility, recharges both surface and treated effluent, has all the state permitting and testing requirements that go with that, and meets both the state and the city water management efforts to maintain long-term groundwater supplies. So a little background on that. So historically, community's wastewater supplies were treated and used to irrigate Antelope Hills Golf Course back into the 50s. When more reclaimed supplies were available than needed for the golf course, then those volumes were released into Granite Creek, which then benefited the Chino Valley Irrigation District, which used that water for irrigation. And that was utilized, or a method of disposing of that excess water, until 1987, at which time the city built the recharge basin facility, and I believe it was the first permitted for the state of Arizona. In 1988, then the city was issued its first recharge project permit for underground storage of the treated effluent, and at that time it allowed the facility to recharge as much or up to 6,721 acre-feet a year. In 2013, with the expansion of the airport water reclamation facility, the city was issued modified permit allowing for the recharge of up to 12,000 acre-feet per year. So this, as with the water pumped versus recharge chart that was previously reviewed on the other item, this compares the surface water and the effluent recharged. Surface water are the green bars in the bottom of the chart. Purple is the reclaimed, so that'd be the treated effluent, and then the blue graph is the total recharge. As you look across there, you can see 2010 was a very wet, good year, as well as then 15 peaks up. Those are going to be direct correlations to better monsoons and or better winter moisture. Like 2017, when we recharged 7,300 acre-feet, the groundwater pump that year was about 6,800. So that year we actually exceeded with recharge. Now in 2020, we were down. We have some other graphs that we use, just in our operations and maintenance of the system. When we go back like 20 years, it's evident specifically with the surface water, as the city has invested into that infrastructure over the years. When the city acquired the lakes and that system, it was a open earthen ditch on a good portion of the distance from the lakes out to the recharge facility, and or very old concrete pipe. So there was a lot of losses in just the transport of that water to the facility. And as we've done projects with replacing that pipeline, and or most recently we replaced the valves on Watson Lake, the Granite Creek Dam, and each time we've done those projects, you can see our surface water efficiency or use of that water increasing and getting better over the years. Then we go into the sewer connection draft report that Carollo Engineers performed for us, and Gwen will speak to that.
Thank you, Craig. So as part of our work on the commission, it was important to identify where the need for sewer would be and what the impacts of that would be. So we hired Carollo Engineers to come in, do an analysis for us. This is information from their draft report dated December of 2020. So we start with the overview map. The study identified 12 areas. It's a little bit difficult to see, but right here is number 12 because there's not a lot of yellow around it. It's a relatively small area. But there are 12 identified areas where those parcels receive city water, but they have no city sewer service. This is just a different view. The red dots indicate parcels that receive a water bill but have no sewer bill from utility billing. So it's pretty much parallels the unsewered area map. Did I miss something?
Just mention the large parcel.
Oh, of course. So I'm sorry, this mouse is going to be funny. So right here, up near area 10, I believe it is a single large parcel that receives city water. But this area right here primarily is area 10.
Which is located where?
I apologize, area 8 right here. Area 8. This is area 8 right here. So the first thing that Carollo did was identify the number of parcels within each area and estimate the population overall that is being served with no sewer. So there are 12 unsewered areas, which total 3,375 parcels. But in addition to that, there are an additional 520 parcels that are not in one of the 12 unsewered areas that we've identified here, giving us a total parcel count of 3,895 parcels. We did use a population estimate of 2.1 persons per household per the last census, giving us an approximate population served of 8,216 people. I'm going to go through each area and just give you a general overview of those areas. Unsewered area number 1 primarily encompasses Rancho Vista Hills and Aspen Acres subdivisions. If we were to sewer this area, it would be primarily served by gravity, and there would be some grinder pumps needed in this particular area. However, it would not need lift stations. It is a rock excavation area, which makes it more difficult. And the downstream pipes are already existing, so there would be no offsite improvements to serve this area. And overall, it was deemed to be relatively less expensive to put sewer in Area 1. Area 2 includes Mountain Club Estates and Pine Knoll Estates primarily. There would be a mix of gravity and grinder pumps in this area as well. At least one lift station would be required. Again, it would have rock excavation, which makes it more difficult. However, the downstream pipes are already existing, and it was listed as being of moderate expense to install sewer throughout this area. Unsewered area number 3 is primarily in the Government Canyon area. It includes Canyon Sites subdivision and Prescott Riviera. It's mostly gravity with some grinder pumps. 2 lift stations would be required for this area. Moderate excavation activities, and there is a downstream pipe that would need to be added to serve this area, making it of moderate expense. Unsewered area number 4 is primarily consist of the Idlewild Tract. It's mostly gravity with some grinder pumps. No lift stations will be required in this area. It is primarily in rock, and the downstream pipes are already existing, making this a relatively less expensive area to develop. Area number 5 includes Grandview Estates, Jackson Acres, Villa Estates, Villa del Cerro Estates. This area would mostly require grinder pumps with some gravity. 1 lift station would be required. Additionally, it is rock excavation, and downstream pipes would need to be added in order to serve this area, making it relatively more expensive than other areas. Area 6 is a very large area. It's in the Meadow Ridge Road. It includes Meadow Ridge Road, White Cloud, Peridot Lane, Moal Drive, Paradise Lane, Garland Drive, Victoria Drive, Yakajba Estates, Country Park Estates and Country Park Ranches, and finally Geneva Woods. It would be served primarily by gravity with some grinder pumps. No lift stations are required for this area. It is primarily in rock, and downstream pipe would be needed to serve this area, making it relatively more expensive. Area 7 is primarily in the North Prescott area. It includes Suburban Acres, Chaparral Hills, Park Terrace, Woodland Vista, Pinion Park, Highland Park, Miramonte Estates, and Panorama. There would be a mix of gravity and grinder pumps in this area. 2 lift stations would be required. It is in rock. However, the downstream pipes already exist. It would be relatively more expensive to develop this area. Unsewered area number 8 consists of Longview Estates. It would be a mix of gravity and grinder pumps. 2 lift stations would be required to serve this area. It's primarily in rock. Downstream pipes would be needed, and it was deemed to be relatively more expensive to develop. Area 9 is Foothills Meadows, Jack Drive, Rogues Retreat, Rawhide Drive, and Tembo Lane. This area could be served with all gravity pipes, no lift station, moderate excavation of soils. All the downstream pipes are existing. It's deemed to be of moderate expense to develop. Area 10 includes Hokagon Village, Tonkawa Subdivision, and Old Kettle Drive, as well as Burnt Ranch. This area would be served primarily by gravity pipes and one gravity sewer that shouldn't say one gravity sewer segment. That should say one force main segment. No lift stations, moderate excavation. All downstream pipes are existing, and it was deemed to be relatively less expensive to develop. Area 11 consists of Antelope Hill Subdivision up near the airport area. It would be built of all gravity pipes. No lift station would be required. Moderate soils excavation. All downstream pipes are existing, and it was deemed to be relatively less expensive to build. And finally, Area 12 includes Juniper Vista Subdivision, including Juniper Drive, Karen Drive, and Terrace Drive. This is up off of Senator Highway. This area would require all grinder pumps. There would be no lift station required. Moderate excavation of soils. Downstream pipes would be required, and it was deemed to be relatively more expensive. This is a summary page of the information that we've covered so far. Here on the left is 3,895 parcels that could potentially be served with sewer within the 12 areas, although we've deemed Area 13, ironically, as 520 septic systems that are outside of the 12 unsewered areas we've identified. There would be 7 lift stations required to serve all lots. 6 of them have difficult excavation. Approximately 747 grinder pumps would be needed to serve this project. The estimated return flows to the city for recharge would be approximately 405.7 acre-feet of water. The infrastructure within the 12 areas, the estimated cost is $79.3 million, and that's in 2020 dollars, with $7.2 million in offsite improvements to serve the 12 unsewered areas, for a total cost of $86.588 million today. So, in summary, 3,895 parcels, serving approximately 8,218 people. The city would estimate to reclaim approximately 405.7 acre-feet of water. The infrastructure to serve these 12 areas include 237,508 linear feet of gravity sewer main, 86,123 linear feet of force main, 7 lift stations, and 747 grinder pumps. Carollo did group the areas into what they consider to be the least difficult, moderately difficult, or the most difficult areas. The least difficult areas consist of approximately 995 parcels. The moderately difficult areas are 1,224 parcels, and the most difficult are 1,156 parcels total. And again, our estimated costs in 2020 for collection mains and offsite infrastructure to the treatment plant is $86.588 million. This does not include any cost for the homeowner on their lot to connect. Are there any questions up to this point? Okay. So we have the Carollo study. Craig covered the why we're doing it. So the mission of the commission was to come up with policy to address this issue. So again, these are draft policies based on discussions of the commission itself. The first thing we looked at is who should this apply to? And primarily individual residential dwelling units are the target for this policy. Any new subdivisions, multifamily residential and commercial projects must construct and connect to city sewer as a condition of receiving city water. So the connections policy, there will be 5 policy statements. Any parcel that receives city water shall connect to city sewer or convert from septic system to sewer within the following policies. The first policy statement is fairly straightforward. New home construction that is adjacent to or abuts a sewer main. New construction receiving city water shall connect to an existing sewer main when the home is built if the sewer main is adjacent to or abutting the property. And I think it's important to note that when the city adopted their new water policy in November of 2019, this code amendment was put into place. It's in City Code today, 2-1-76, that new construction, if they are adjacent or abutting a sewer main, must connect to the sewer if they receive city water. The second policy statement is also for new home construction, but is for new homes that are not adjacent to or abutting a sewer main. If new home construction receiving city water is not adjacent to or abutting a sewer main, the property owner will be required to extend the sewer main and connect to it. At the request of the owner, a reimbursement district per Prescott City Code 2-111 may be created to recover additional cost. One of the things that came up in the discussion of the commission was that this policy should not apply to the 12 unsewered areas, as it would be anticipated that sewer would be brought to those 12 unsewered areas at some point in the future. There is some risk to the person who would have to extend a sewer main, and that they would have to pay all cost up front to connect or to extend the main, and they may or may not get reimbursed, as reimbursement districts generally have an expiration date of 15 years. Policy statement number 3 is for use of septic systems. The Public Works Director or his designee may allow septic systems that would otherwise be prohibited by these rules. There may be some circumstances where extension of sewer main is not feasible or possible, and in those instances, the Public Works Director could grant an exemption from the requirement to connect. However, in all cases of installation of new septic system, the owner shall sign and the city will record in the office of the Yavapai County Recorder's Office an instrument that requires abandonment of the septic system and connection to an abutting or adjacent sewer main when it is available, regardless of the age or condition of the septic system. Sorry, different on my screen. There we go. So policy statement 4 has to do with existing homes connecting to existing sewer mains. Existing homes that receive city water, which are using a septic system and are adjacent to or abutting a sewer main, will be required to connect to city sewer at the soonest occurrence of one of the following: within 18 months of adoption of the sewer connection policy, when the property is sold and the ownership is transferred, or when the existing septic system or leach field fails. We did do some research with Corollo, and they were able to identify just over 300 parcels within these areas that are within 50 feet of a sewer main today. So this policy would potentially affect a little over 300 current property owners. The 5th policy statement is for existing homes that would connect to new sewer mains. A sewer connection program would be established, which would identify and prioritize design, construction, and funding of new sewer mains in areas that are served by city water but are currently on septic. The program would include annual funding in the city's budget for design and construction of projects within unsewered areas. So we're primarily talking about the 12 unsewered areas that we have been reviewing. At the completion of construction of the sewer main, existing homes would be required to connect to the new main. There are several options for when that connection would take place, and some of that is tied to our funding options, which I'm gonna talk about here in just a couple minutes. If the city forms a special assessment district, then connection to the new mains would be required as part of the construction of the neighborhood mains. If the city or the neighborhood uses other financing mechanisms, then the commission is recommending that they connect to new mains within 18 months of completion of construction of the new sewer main, when the property is sold and ownership is transferred, or when the existing septic system or leach field fail, whichever occurs first. Are there any questions about the 5 policy statements before I move on? Okay. The next part of the presentation is about the responsibility for cost related to the construction of this infrastructure, some proposed fees or fees to explore further, and then the funding mechanisms that would be available to implement the sewer connection policy. The first one is really the question of who pays for what. There are 3 major components to connection to sewer. The first includes trunk mains and the treatment plant. The second are the collection mains that run in the streets within the neighborhoods in front of the lots. And the last component is the on-site improvements that the homeowner would have to do in order to connect to these new mains, and that includes development impact fees. Typically, wastewater fund ratepayers and development impact fees pay for trunk mains, treatment plants, and larger infrastructure that serve the entire community. When it comes to collection mains within neighborhoods, today, that would be paid for by the developer that's developing the subdivision. The commission is recommending that those costs be absorbed by the ratepayers, as well as grants. And I think it's important to note that most grants that are out there for water and wastewater infrastructure come from the federal and the state level, and they're only offered to municipal entities or municipal utility providers. They're not offered to your individual homeowners to connect to those systems once they're built. So the city would have some opportunity to receive grant monies from both the federal and the state level to help offset some of that $86.5 million that we're talking about. On the next slide, I'm going to talk about some fees that were talked about in the committee or the commission and the potential for those. The on-site lot improvement costs would be borne by the homeowner. And again, these are the recommendations of the commission, and I'm sure we'll have many more discussions about this. So some of the fees that were suggested in the committee discussions, one of them was to assess a monthly sewer fee equal to the average bill by class. So for those customers that we have in the community now that only receive sewer but do not receive water, the city has determined an average cost per month based on a class of users like residential or industrial, so on and so forth. So the recommendation is that the monthly sewer fee that is equal to the average bill by residential class would be assessed to water users that are adjacent to or abutting a sewer main but are not connected to the sewer main. And as I mentioned earlier, that's just over 300 parcels today. Another suggestion was to look into a water finite resource fee or potentially a water surcharge fee, where water users that are not connected to sewer would pay a fee to help recover the loss of the ability to recharge water. And finally, a water pollution penalty for water users that were adjacent or abutting a sewer main but are not connected to that main. So again, these are things for consideration for the council and this committee. We're not necessarily recommending that you do or don't adopt these. These were ideas that were brought forward and would need to be explored further. So what are the funding sources we have available to us, or the potential funding sources we have available to us to pay for the $86.5 million in cost for we call them off-site improvement because they're off of private property and they're in public property. As we discussed, there are grants available at the federal and state level to the city. The state of Arizona recently became eligible for Environmental Infrastructure Act funding, which staff is exploring the limits of what that could encompass. We have the ability to form special assessment districts here within the city and also within the county with the county's help by forming an IGA. We have the ability to use reimbursement district for those that extend sewer main at their own cost. And we also have revenues within the wastewater fund. Those are the sewer rates that everyone pays into, but that would also require a rate increase. For the on-site lot improvements, those would be the improvements needed by the homeowner to reestablish their yard line, abandon the septic tank, reestablish landscaping, those kinds of things. Those costs would be paid by the homeowner, or they could be paid by the formation of a special assessment district over time. Are there any questions about cost, responsibilities, fees, or funding? Okay. We've covered a lot of information in the presentation today. We know that this isn't the end. This is going to be an ongoing process. There are several additional work items that we need to continue to work through, as well as the public process hearing from our community. One of the things that we would need to do is amend city code to require additional sewer connections in some of the policy statements, enter into an intergovernmental agreement with Yavapai County Environmental Services as it relates to their issuance of septic permits within the city water service area, an intergovernmental agreement with Yavapai County for the formation of special assessment districts that would primarily be outside of the city limits. Right now, 8 of the 12 areas we've identified have all or a portion outside of the city limits. The future abandonment of septic systems, we need to create an instrument that we can record. And we need to consider and explore further the adoption of new fees and penalties. That's the end of our presentation. We're happy to take questions. Open it up to comment.
Lots of stuff.
Lots of information, as Craig mentioned. It's a lot.
It's lots of stuff to go over. So I guess at this point, and you're right, to be able to have this in front of us and to be able to digest each section to formulate questions is definitely going to take more than just one meeting, probably several, as people out there in the public begin to formulate their thoughts. Mr. Lamar, do you have questions? Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of want, I spend a lot of time at the macro level, and I wanted to allay some concerns I've seen in the public. When you look at this, the most water we could get is 405 acre feet of water, okay, for an $86 million investment. The idea that we're doing this to capture water for the growth and development is asinine. There are cheaper ways to get 405 acre feet of water than spend $86 million. So for people to take this as anything more than us trying to do the right thing environmentally over the next 3 to 4 decades is a joke.
Right. That's my thought as I have been doing this for 20 years and we've had report after report on Watson and Willow Lake and those water bodies being impaired by E. coli and ammonia and the different things that sewage causes. I think it's imperative that we look at being responsible and taking some of these older systems out. I don't know that necessarily you go with the least expensive one, but you might want to go with the ones that are more ancient, like Hokegan, that's been in place for 60, 70 years, where those systems are probably not the best in the world. Their leach lines have probably been replaced 2 or 3 different times. It drains directly into the creek bed below that development. So I think that as we're looking at realistic replacement, we need to consider the environmental impacts that each one of those has. The whole mission is to alleviate, at least in my opinion as chairman, as we kept telling the folks on the committee, is to eliminate the septic systems. And didn't have to do whether it was close to a creek or not, but yet that there is an environmental improvement that the ones that are close to a creek would have a double positive if we got rid of those. So, Bill and Steve, lots of stuff to talk about. If you guys want to go ahead. I lived it for a long time, so.
Well, I know that this is a very complex proposal and policy that will affect the potential 12 areas at various degrees of impact, both financially and being able to create districts, try to find some financing, and then being able to justify whether those costs should be borne by the community at large or focused primarily on those districts that are the most impacted. In order for me to even comment with any studied validity to this, I'd need much more information. Just because it's convenient or lower cost to convert one area doesn't necessarily mean that it's benefiting the goals of this committee that was formed to analyze this. You'd have to have some type of a weighted analysis tool, so you could say what area is contributing to the worst amount of pollution into our lakes. Combine that with the number of locations and homes in that area. What are the conditions of those septic tanks, septic systems? You were mentioning Hokegan. Obviously, that is probably one that does have a high propensity to contribute to degradation of the water quality. It's outside the city limits, and most of those are quite old. But for our ability to impose financial costs on residents that are outside the city limits is very questionable in my mind. I think it just requires much more scientific justification and analysis to come up with where this should be applied. Is it necessary? What the costs are? Whether the community that's going to be impacted the most is willing to pay those costs, and then the benefit to the community at large or the city at large. A lot of different questions here. I know that Antelope Hills was kind of identified as a very low-cost area, but it doesn't really impact the E. coli contamination of our reservoir systems. So just because it's low cost and it's nearby shouldn't make it a priority. And then conversely, you've got some areas that are very high cost, but they're so far away that they're unlikely to ever have a contribution to degrading the water quality. And there's various locations in between. So I think the committee should be analyzing some type of a weighted analysis system to be able to determine what are the priorities, when they should be instituted, and even an 18-month kind of a horizon. If you figure the average cost is somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000, you're talking about $1,500 a month just to be able to reach that number. And it, calculating the cost per acre foot of water, it's $211,000 per acre foot. So agreeing with City Manager Lamar, that's certainly not an economical number to try to acquire acre feet of effluent. So it really has to be focused on what are the contributions to the degradation of the water quality, and then be able to have some type of a well thought out, well analyzed, evidence-based criteria for determining what the costs are, when they are, and make sure that every single person that's involved in these areas, it clearly understands what the consequences and costs are. It's a very complex area. So just looking at it on the surface here, we're so far away of being able to even determine whether this is a policy that we want to implement throughout the city and on the periphery of those areas that have some inclusion in the city border and some that aren't. So I think it's going to take a long time to analyze this and make a decision that makes sense.
Steve.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I have to agree with Phil, as hard as that may seem to believe. My conclusion is, if in fact we are benefiting the community as a whole by getting rid of the pollutants in our streams and in our lakes, shouldn't the community as a whole have to bear some of the cost?
Right.
And my other thing is, there are benefits that we're not looking at here. I remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, when Prescott Valley basically said, we're building a sewer system, and I don't care what you think, you are going to connect to it. So here's the bill. And I remember we owned a lot out there that was going to be affected by this. So we said, well, we can't bear the cost of that. We're going to sell. So we sold for very little just to get out. And the problem was, once the sewer system was in, property values dramatically increased because of the infrastructure that was there. If I would have, in hindsight, I would have borne the cost of the sewer because there were benefits that we just couldn't see at that time. So there's got to be benefits other than what we've explained here for the folks that live in these areas, because of the infrastructure that will be there. So that's just my comment. I don't really have any questions. I think we're way too new in this process to really delve deeply into it. But I think that there's other ways to look at this, and there's certainly, we have to look at what is the benefit to the entire community.
Good comments. And I'll go back and think that there's two direct correlations that I see, and I'll bring them up again. And environmental is one of them. And we've worked really hard at all the studies trying to determine that we're a mecca now of people that want to come and enjoy our two reservoirs, kayaking, fishing, whatever the case may be. We put in new pipes in our sewer mains down those creeks and replaced them with pipe busting, and the city's spent a lot of money on replacing our infrastructure. And there's a point in time where I say we need to look at people that don't have good infrastructure when it comes to sewage that's affecting all of our lives in this community. And we have to figure out a level playing field of how to address each one of these areas when it comes to what environmental hazards they're creating. I've talked to numerous people in all these different areas, and you can go to Antelope Hills and you can take 12 people at Antelope Hills, and 6 of them will say, yeah, we want sewage. And the other 6 will go, well, we don't want sewage because we just spent $15,000 on a new system, and it works fine. So you're going to have it both ways, and you have to analyze the size of the lots that you're on. When I have a small lot in North Prescott and my sewer system has been replaced 5 times, I have no place to go, and the sewage is coming out on the top of the ground and running down the creek into my neighbor's property, then what's that answer? So there's so many different variables to look at. You know, the larger your property is, you can say, well, my septic tank sits on an acre, but it might sit on an acre of fractured rock. So every bit of that sewage runs through this fractured rock and ends up in a creek 2 or 3 miles away. So it's a very complex thing, but I think we need to stay focused on it. We've spent a lot of money with Corollo, and maybe figure out some guidelines and listen to the public. We're not going to please everybody out here. Certainly, I know that after all the times we've tried to look at North Prescott on all the small lots on Nolte and all those different areas, and then you get a big lot up on top of the hill, and he says, well, I just put in $30,000 worth of infrastructure, and I'm not going to pay the city anything, and I'm going to sue you over it. Okay, now what do you do? So and then you have people say, well, why didn't the city council do anything? Why don't you do the right thing for the people? Well, here we are trying to do the right thing for the people, and then we're getting chastised over getting in their pocketbook. So there's a real correlation of what is the right thing to do and the wrong thing. How many people do we have out there that want to chat?
We have Howard Mechanic on Zoom.
Okay.
Go ahead, Howard. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And I attended all of the committee meetings. And I don't think there's anybody in the city who's opposed to cleaning up the lakes and the streams. Everybody would like to do that. The question is it economically feasible? And what is the plan to actually clean up the contamination? Now, as Mr. Good stated, I haven't seen any studies to show any of these 12 areas, and if part of those areas contribute to the pollution in the surface water. Now, there's ways to test by putting in markers and seeing if the water that goes in a particular area ends up in the creeks. And I haven't seen any testing done to show any of these areas or even part of those areas have sewage that goes into the creek. Now, there have been scientific studies done in different parts of the country. And one report showed that a bacteria will travel 232 feet underground. And that's as far as it'll go. Because the ground naturally, through physical and biological operations, will clean up the bacteria. So in those areas, if you're over 232 feet away from a creek, and even if your system is failing, it does not cause pollution in the creek. The report, Granite Creek Watershed Plan of 2012, indicated that there was human fecal contamination of surface water that was widespread in the watershed, and showed that it was in areas, all types of areas. However, it stated that there was no, quote, there is no strong conclusion that can be made regarding the source of human fecal contamination. The report did not state that this contamination came from septic systems. So if you're going to tell the public that there is contamination coming from the septic systems that's ending in the creeks, prove it. I think we're talking about $86 million of public money, probably another 20 or 30 million in private money, well over $100 million.
Mr. Mechanic, can I please have you wrap up your comment?
And I'd also ask Craig when we're going to get an update, especially on Area 3 that was brought up, corrections were brought up 6 months ago, and I thought you indicated at the last commission meeting that those updates would be presented.
Thank you, Mr. Mechanic.
Anybody else on Zoom?
Not on Zoom. We have a few people in the...
Okay, let's go ahead and start going through those then.
Okay, Mr. Atona? Atona. And you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Council members, committee members, my name is Art Atona. My comments are an introduction to the summary of the points that fellow presenters Mike Breen and Jim Kircher will be making today. The city's proposal to eliminate nearly 1,900 septic systems in Prescott and nearly 1,700 in Yavapai County is ill-conceived, it's inadequately studied, and is poorly targeted. Why? The goals have not been clearly defined, nor have the reasons behind the goals been clearly identified. The question remains, what needs to be done to achieve identifiable goals? Would that be cleaning of Watson Lake, repairing of century-old degraded sewer pipes, cleaning up decaying vegetation along drainage features in our landscape, recharging the aquifer, reducing human and animal waste within drainage areas, or acquiring water credits to entice growth? Once goals are identified, how are they to be prioritized? I've listened to all of the meetings of the commission previously, and I did not come away with the feeling that there was a good system of prioritization. I note that the Mayor's Commission has reported on a set of noting that the Mayor's Commission has reported on a set of goals or identifiable priorities with any clarity. That has not occurred in my judgment. The public has not been given adequate opportunity to weigh in on the issues. And then there's the matter of costs. City staff suggested that what amounts to an astronomical cost for an undetermined series of projects which are anticipated by city staff to take decades to complete. The cost has been stated by staff to be determined as time goes by and as funds are needed. Funding sources have not been identified, nor has municipal bonding been considered. In addition, the president's proposal for infrastructure improvements may well provide a new funding source, and at the moment, planning cannot or should not proceed without knowing the benefits that might become available to figure them into the plan or program. One suggestion has been to punitively surcharge those who don't connect to or cannot afford to connect to a new sewer. Another suggestion is to force every Prescott user to pay a water monthly fee to amortize the sewer line construction costs for years into the future. The draft proposal does not begin to address the burden on nearly 3,600 city and county residents with septic tanks, requiring them to cancel their systems by costly digging up, filling in, and removal of tanks or leach lines. This is an ill-conceived concept, far too consequential to all the Prescott residents to justify moving forward without first engaging in significant study. What we are embarked on here today seems to be more like a rush to move forward without what one councilman described as a project he has pushed for years, instead of a better deliberative process to include stakeholders and consideration of all goals and objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Jim Kircher? Carricker. Excuse me.
Thank you for letting us talk here.
Excuse me, could you
Pardon?
not only give your name but where you live?
Yeah, my name is Jim Carricker. Again, I thank you guys for letting us talk here and give you our opinion. My past background has been consulting engineering. I've owned my own firm. I specialize in water and wastewater systems.
What's your address?
I'm getting there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I do live in the Antelope Hills subdivision, and things that happen in our area that maybe you don't know, maybe you do. That subdivision was one of the only developments done by the city. Part of that subdivision has pipe sewer. Our area does not. Why they didn't put the sewer in our area, but it's probably related to cost benefit when they sold the lots. Now, our septic tanks and drain fields, and I've designed these types of systems, the large systems, small systems. The soils are conducive for good percolation. They're approved by the county for the standards related to the soils. You have to do the perk test. You have to dig the test pits. We're not causing any pollution. We're downstream from Watson Lake, so we don't relate to the issue about the environmental condition of Watson Lake and the sludge in the bottom of that lake. We're over half a mile from Granite Creek, so we're not causing any pollution and we're not causing any problems. Yes, we're the low-hanging fruit on the tree, but still, it's things are working well in that subdivision. With the latest Water and Sewer Commission study, they implied that, and you saw that on your screen above, that they wanted to give us a sewer charge when we don't have a sewer. They wanted to penalize us for environmental pollution when we're not causing pollution. I know that you have to go through rate studies, and I've done rate studies for cities and towns, and it doesn't make any sense where we would have a sewer charge when we don't have sewer, and we're not causing pollution. The other issue that I'll make the statement that I do not have a problem with having a sewer system, but what was implied in the last Water and Sewer Commission was that they were going to possibly mandate the users to pay. Typically, it'd go through a SAD and you find a boundary. You look for participation. You do a preliminary design. You come up with real cost estimates based on that preliminary design. You put it to the people and you put it to the vote. But basically what was implied was that if they don't agree to that, they're going to mandate the system and the people are going to have to pay anyway.
Mr. Character, your 3 minutes is up.
Okay. In closing, briefly, you guys need to annex areas when you give them water. You lose control, and it's a perfect example of what's happening with these 12 areas. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Breen, and please state your address. Thank you. And again, you have 3 minutes.
I'm Michael Breen. I live at 21 Perkins. I was a member of the commission, and I had lots of viewpoints that I don't think were reflected in the final draft that came about really quickly. We only had about 6 or 7 members on the commission that were not our residents, and There was a handout I printed and gave to the members here that said they were going to have members from all 12 of the unsewered areas. That didn't occur, so the feedback you would have got from those areas wasn't forthcoming. I think it would have been quite a bit different. Some of the things that I agree with, the cost idea of water, if you're recycling it, 400 gallons per year, even at 25 years is $5,000 a gallon, and you can buy it for $250 a gallon. Or an acre foot, excuse me. And so the value of the recycled water, it doesn't make any sense. In terms of the pollution, the Clean Water Act's been around for 5 decades. 70% of the waterways in the country, 70% of the waterways and reservoirs and lakes in the state do not conform to those Clean Water Act. They're out of compliance. The state EPA gives the state primacy. The state has no mandated programs. Although it says we'd like to comply, there is no actions telling us to comply. And I've been in touch with on phone for 2 hours of meetings with ADAQ. I've sent questions to the county asking for evidence of how many septic systems there are. The county does not have any data, nor does ADAQ, on how many septic systems have gone into Prescott over the years. They have no projections. I have the documentation emails from Susan Ehrlich about that. They have no projections for new septic systems. They can't tell you how many septic systems were failed. When I asked how many septic systems they had, they told me they had 724 homes. They sent me a spreadsheet. That's far under the number that actually exists. They don't know, those, they only indicated 77 needed repairs over the time. If they fail, they don't know when they've been replaced or if they've been replaced. They have no records of that, and they don't seem to ADAQ doesn't seem to require them. When a home has septic problems and it's sold, it's identified with a test, and 1% of the real estate value. I'm a realtor, I know this. 1% can be dedicated and has to be presented to fix it. And so septic systems are monitored. Unlike homes in the area, all the sewer lines are not monitored that go from the homes on their property, or 100-year-old homes here in the area. And we talked with Craig, and he said that the projects to fix the sewer lines in the city will take decades too, and that hasn't been done. I could talk for a long time. I did talk at one of the meetings. At the last meeting, there are no minutes from that meeting available to the public. So it says, thank you for your service. No actions were taken. All the comments and some of the ones I've given here were in that discussion at the last meeting. They do not appear in the minutes. So,
Mr. Bean, your 3 minutes is up.
All right.
Thank you.
I agree with almost all the other speakers, and I do agree with Phil Good that we've got a long way to go before we can get this done. 25% of the people in Prescott Valley in 2008 were in favor of this. 76% were not.
Thank you.
Got it?
That's it for the public comments, other than speaker request forms we received online.
Okay.
And I'll go ahead and read those 3. This is from Lorraine West. I see 2 potential benefits to having a water and sewer connection policy. First, a reduction in pollution of the upper Granite Creek watershed. Second, an increase in permanent recharge of treated effluent. One question I have for the committee is, which of the 3,895 property parcels is in a position to pollute the Upper Creek watershed? The statement there is a direct correlation between the lakes and streams and unsewered areas within the Prescott area is too broad and generalized to justify the proposed policy and associated costs. If any of the recharge is going towards water credits, then this policy proposal has identified the wrong sources of funds. As a Prescott taxpayer and recipient of Prescott Water Service, I have no interest in funding an increase in water credits. The policy does not appear to address multifamily residential and commercial properties that are already receiving Prescott Water Service but are not connected to city sewer. Am I correct in assuming that none exist? The Carollo report states that some of the unsewered areas will have a significant percentage of the land that is not yet developed, and there is no guarantee that all parcels will develop. Therefore, the estimate of acre-feet per year of reclaimed water is likely an overestimate in the average cost to connect a house in these areas an underestimate. Nancy Roberts. My husband and I are retired on fixed incomes. We live outside the city limits but have city water, and our own septic, which we maintain. We can't afford to pay for sewer hookups. I would suggest a grandfather clause for those such as us. And finally, from Jackie McClish. I understand that long-term sustainability of our water supply is under threat, and reclaiming water from septic systems is one way to capture a bit more water. If, however, this reclaimed water is not recharging our aquifers and instead is being used for new development, there is no gain to a secure water future for our area. Since new developments will have access to the gained 400 acre-feet per year of reclaimed water, they should pay for a large chunk of the city's infrastructure costs, plus help pay the homeowner connection costs. As the draft policy is currently written, the burden of paying for the reclaimed water rests entirely on our residents. The draft policy is unreasonable in expecting households to connect to the sewer system within 18 months of its availability. This short timeline will likely force many of our residents to either sell their homes or put their financial future in jeopardy by paying $15,000 to $20,000 plus to decommission their septic tanks and connect to the sewer. It will be overwhelming to many if they have to find, screen, and choose contractors and then oversee the work. The penalty clause written into draft policy just pours salt in the wound. The city must work with homeowners to provide an explanation how they can force county residents to connect to city sewers, ample publicized opportunities to provide input on the proposed policies, answers to how developers will contribute to the cost of improvements, affordable cost sharing and financing options, and screen contractors with negotiated package pricing for the areas. This is an issue that could force people from their homes and will lower the value of their property if they have to sell, and a new buyer would have to spend $15,000 to $20,000 to connect to the sewer. And that is all.
Okay. Did you guys hear enough? I'm sure the city manager did as well. Just to make the statement, back years ago, living on Roma Avenue as a young man, our family was, I guess you would want to say, made to hook up to the sewer when Taylor Hicks School went in. And they made the whole subdivision do the same thing. This is not an unheard of thing to do. And it probably, realistically, at least in my mind, is the right thing to do. I've heard from a lot of different people, and of course the people you hear from the most are the people that don't want it. But there's a lot of them out there that do want it because they have issues. So when you start talking about what is the mission of a council or a committee, is to look at these things as a long-term range and look at what we can or cannot do. And most people would be sitting here right now saying, okay, it's 20 years, we're done. Let's just move on and let everybody live their own life and go on down the road. Because I don't know at this point in time how you get any further without spending thousands and thousands of dollars and then having the same outcome. People that want it and people that don't. So from my standpoint, unless the federal government or the EPA forces us at some point to do something, I hope I'm not going to hear, why didn't you guys do something? Because here we are convened trying to figure out the right thing to do and a way to do it. And we just hit a roadblock from what I hear. So we'll end this meeting. I'll have a conversation with the city manager and Public Works and see if we want to spend more money aggressively doing the different steps and trying to identify. I don't know how you go about identifying each parcel in each zone and claiming that one has a problem over one that does not. That's going to be a task that I don't even see happening out there. So, Phil, you have any comments?
Chairman Blair?
Yes.
Oh, excuse me. I have Millie Owens on Zoom with her hand. Would you like me to allow her to?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead, Millie. Millie,
are you there?
go ahead.
Yes, I'm here. In response to the one comment that was submitted, the city attorney told our committee that grandfather does not exist. It's an antiquated term. If he can help me out on that, I'd appreciate it.
He has left the room, so Millie, we'll see if we can. Michael, you have something?
Well, Mr. Chairman, if there's a desire to take this to any next step, I have a couple suggestions, and we can consider them. You guys can consider them today, and then council consider them as a whole at some future deal. One is, to go back to Mr. Mechanics, is there an ability to do an environmental study so you could have the cost-benefit analysis and the dollars and cents, and then the environmental impact, and make a more informed decision? That's something you could consider. And then the second thing is, because the reclaimed water is 405 acre feet, and there continues to be this thought that we're going to use this for future development, in my mind, the 405 acre feet is kind of a drop in the proverbial bucket, pun completely intended. You could say that whatever you get out of a project going forward, you put to permanent recharge. If you're making an environmental argument on the front end, make it on the back end that whatever you get, you're going to put in the aquifer. Those are things you could consider doing. Or you could, decide you're done. Just some thought, food for future thought.
I appreciate that. I just get a little bit perturbed in the fact that it's always about this growth thing. If we're trying to do this so we can have more water for growth, are you kidding me? I'll go back and say that 100,000 times over. Putting this on the public to do their yard lines and the infrastructure that the citizens would have to bear to get a few more houses out there, when we're out of room for houses in the city limits of Prescott anyway. So let's get past this growth thing. It doesn't work for me. Yes, Steve.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think we're hung up on the 405 acre feet.
Yeah, we are.
That's for a year, right? So in 10 years, that's 4,000. In 20 years, it's 8,000. In 30 years, it's 12,000 acre feet of water that will be going back down into the aquifer through our recharge facility, right?
That would be correct.
And it's not $86 million every year to compare that $400 again, or 400 acre feet against. It's $86 million. And how long will this infrastructure last, Craig?
Minimum 7 years.
Minimum 7 years?
70.
70? Okay.
Yep.
So, I think overall it's probably a good investment if we can justify it. If we can find real reasons for improving this area by doing what we're doing.
Okay. To the aspect too of the 405 feet, and excellent concepts, ideas that Michael has. Everything we do, we can look at it 10 different ways. Another way of looking at 405 acre feet a year, for instance, in comparison to 2020, we had a differential of about 2,200 acre feet between water recharged and water pumped. So if we could have an additional 405 acre feet of water recharged, that would have reduced that differential by 18%.
I think it may sound difficult, but I think it's probably achievable. We have identified through Corollo and through all the research through our water billing records that we have the ability to know the addresses of all these folks that live in these different zones, all 13. And I'd like to know, before I consider putting any more of my time into this, is to put out a simple question and answer those people in each zone to respond by a specific time. If sewer were available to your area, would you consider being part of an improvement district? Now, if we get back 80% that says we don't want sewer, then why are we wasting our time unless the government forces our hand to do so?
Good point.
It becomes a cost burdensome thing for all the citizens of this community as well as the neighborhood. But if you get North Prescott and you send them out a card to all of them, let's see what the response we get from all 13 areas. And if you get North Prescott that says, well, there's 70% of them, because we have to have a buy-off from the people that live there, or then we become the heavy hand of the government.
Absolutely.
So I would suggest that we do a question and answer to each one of those areas and qualify all of them and then bring it back to us, and let's look at it as a committee again.
I agree, Chairman Blair. Such a massive and complex policy implementation not only requires a very thorough justification, and just because you have correlations, they don't meet the same standard of cause and effect. Many of these areas are going to be financially burdened, and if it takes 20 years to get a benefit, and we have an average age here in our city of 56, most of the people, by the time the benefit actually occurs, aren't around anymore.
Right.
So if they have to be forced to sell their property because they can't afford to pay the implementation costs before the benefits occur, like you described, Member Shishka, they don't get the benefit for the expense that they would be forced to incur. So I just think that it's inadequately studied and it's inadequately supported. And I agree, if we send out a real survey for the people that are directly going to be impacted, and there's a significant majority that agrees to the value of that, then perhaps we can put together a phased in and a prioritized list of areas and find some way to finance this without the heavy-handed part of government that mandates these types of costs with maybe the benefit that's questionable. So if it's going to be that broad of an issue and that massive of a cost, then we probably need to have the people vote on it.
Yeah, and that's why I think truly that if each one of these zones is sent an application in the mail and get it back and tally them up, and if there's no drive from anybody out there, you know, in an improvement district, you have to have over 50%. And if we can't get 50% in any of these zones, then why are we wasting our time? Yeah. So, I mean, that's just how I feel about it. I mean, it's important that we try to take care of our environment and our lakes and everything else, but I don't know how you do that unless you have people that are willing to help. And I was willing to help to have this group committee and willing to try to get to somewhere different. And maybe we can still do that by identifying each one of these areas. So Craig, you and I can talk with the city manager and see if we can get cards made up and sent to these different zones and then tally them. And if there's not the will of the people, then there's not the will of this councilman to move on.
Mr. Chair, I also think we need to, in that consideration, we need to look at what the effect on property values is between a sewer system and a septic system. I'm not sure if it's across the board, but I would also like to be that be a factor if we continue to explore this.
Yeah, I think we can ask that question. It depends on who you talk to. The people that want it say it affects their property value in a big way because they put their house up for sale and you got green stuff in your backyard coming up through the ground. Sure, it would affect their property values. But if you have somebody that has a working system, they're going to tell you, no, it's not going to affect my property value. I'm getting the most I can get for it now. So you're going to hear different comments out of everybody, I think, when it comes, to that element of it.
I just being from let's say an expert in the real estate field, saying, typically unsewered, sewered, what's the difference in property values?
Maybe we ask Judge Simmons the straightforward question of, is there a way to evaluate what it does for property value? Just get his opinion. He's the guy that sets those values.
Well, he certainly seems to have an opinion on cell towers, so
yeah,
I'm sure that,
So, I mean, I guess that's the point. The point being is we can ask everybody, whether you're a realtor or a broker, I mean, you can hear all kinds of comments, but let's go to Judge Simmons. That's what he does. That's who we voted on to set property values. And if there is a mechanism to be able to identify sewer opposed to non-sewer, then we need to know that as well. Any other questions from the committee? Okay, stay tuned. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Have a good day.